you have to have a way. You have to have a way. We have to start all over again. We have to. Man, dang it! That first. No, it's good, Beverly. It's all good. Um, well, and so Joe Verba talks about what troubles me. It's kind of hatred we're talking about is still being taught today. Others, yeah, losing, loss of power. Yeah, I think you can respond to somehow you think you're going to lose something, and I think part of the Voting Rights Act, which only makes sense, is all of a sudden, in Mississippi or Alabama, in these majority Black communities, surprise, surprise, when Black people can vote, they elect Black people. So, but doesn't that make sense that if I'm in we all talk about representation, right? If I'm in a community, then the fact that I might elect people like me to represent me
Right.
is basically fair. But I think at some point, um, and again, this is where the church was deeply complicit. The white church was deeply complicit and the Southern Baptists, and I'm going to pick on them for a second because I'm from them. The Southern Baptist Convention um, came out in the 1840s, 1830s, because the Northern Baptists had said you can't own slaves. You
Mhm.
can't be a missionary and own slaves. Well, the Southern Baptists, they said, no, you can be a missionary and still own slaves. So they had a pact at the beginning with slavery and the gospel. And a part of what happened then after the Civil War, you lose the Civil War, and if you thought God was on your side, then what do you do with that? And there's this whole genre of sort of the theology of the lost cause, so that you had to then create a biblical world and a theological world that somehow said, even though you lost the war, you were somehow still the righteous people.
Right.
And so I think once you go down that road, and once you keep refusing to think about conversion and change of heart, and what would it be like to live with all of God's people, I think once you can't make that choice,
Right.
what it does to your heart and your mind just keeps being perverted. And then what you're willing to do to other people,
Right.
what you're willing to do to children, what you're willing to do to others, because they can't be like you. If they're like you, then this whole world falls apart.
Yeah. I mean, they even the governor of Mississippi even declared that God was the first segregationist.
Oh, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The sermons, I read a book a couple years ago on the moral history of the Civil War that talked about both both the northern and the southern pulpits and how they made sense of the Civil War theologically.
Mm.
You could do probably a whole, it'd be wild to look at the sermons that were preached during the civil rights movement, right? Of both a call to action, to participate, to go south, to integrate. And I'm sure some humdinger of some sermons, not just in the South, but that would have said, all of this is wrong. You know,
Correct.
folks need to know their place. All of that sort of stuff that would have been a part of those sermons.
It
Uh,
was to that point in terms of kind of what the churches and clergy were doing or not doing. I've never read the letter from Birmingham jail until
Never
I've
until
never, I never have.
yeah.
Um, wow. That's all. Wow. One, I didn't even know it was addressed to clergy.
Oh yeah.
So that was another aha moment for me. There's a whole lot in here, for sure. But one goes to the point one of the points you were making is, how we change it from instead of being I thou, it's
Mhm.
I it, right? So you have to dehumanize people. You have to make them less than human in order to kind of do the dance you were just describing. And sadly, all the messages are kind of in that vein when it comes to Black-white relations in this country. And the part that pains me the most is Black folks hear those same messages, right? So our self-image, our own, our self-respect is damaged by that,
Sure.
right? To me, the enslavement of Black folks, the worst part of that was the psychological damage.
Sure. Sure.
Right? When he talks about being, between two forces, right? The complacent Black folks who are like, this is as good as it's gonna get, I just gotta live through it. Or people who have become, complicit with the system that somehow is working for them. And they don't want to mess that up, right? And then the, moderate whites who are saying, oh, just wait, take your time, all of that. All of that is still very present today. I mean, that's the other thing about this book is just how much remains relevant, right? Almost 60 years later.
Yeah, and that was, I think, for for King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And again, I would say I guess I first read it in seminary. I would say to folks on the call, if you haven't read it, because to me, March is also an invitation to so many other things, other things we ought to read after reading March. And, there was a book done a few years ago that looked at the clergy, at the particular clergy persons who were addressed by the letter. Because I think they had written a letter to him, and there's Beverly Hurley Hill. There she is. And there you can find the letter. So, a group of clergy had written him. So he's responding with his letter. And what this book did was, and I'm sure Beverly can find the title, or we'll find the title. This book explored the clergy who received this letter and what it did to them. And for some of them, it was a wake-up call. For some of them, it was sort of an acknowledgement that I'm in the wrong, and it was a move to conversion. For some, they can never move from it, and it impacted who they were. And Episcopal Bishop of Alabama being one of those who received that letter. But yeah, I think it's to me, again, this goes back to just like the nonsensical nature of we don't think Black people should go to a movie about the freeing of slaves. To me, how much of the New Testament is written from jail. and so for Dr. King to write a letter from jail is so much in the vein of the gospel. I also love it, when they are in the jail in Mississippi and they're singing. So if we all remember our Sunday school class of Paul and Silas, singing in jail, that's a gospel mandate, if you will, that they're going to sit there and they're going to sing, and they're going to, and so again, and to me, the incredible image of people who are enslaved or people who are imprisoned end up being more free than the prison guard.
Because I think I don't know whether it was this book or the other one, was like about the mattresses. Like, what are you going to do? Put me in jail?
Right. Yeah, man. At some point, you realize they've won the argument, right? They are like, we're just, and it's that incredible moment of, years ago, I heard James Forbes. I don't know if James Forbes, who for years was the senior minister at Riverside Church in New York City, this incredible preacher, African-American man. I heard him preach a sermon once about Moses's mother and Pharaoh's daughter. So Moses wants to save her child, so she puts him out, and Pharaoh's daughter rescues him, but then the mother ends up like caring for the child. And he had this great line about Pharaoh's daughter thought she was giving orders. She wasn't giving orders. She was taking orders, from the Spirit of God. And so to me, the image of they are singing singing in prison, and their ability to how they're joshing and getting in the head of these prison guards. I mean, they put them in knots, and they're the one in prison. Yeah. And I think again, that's what a deep sadness for me of the church's deep investment in segregation. As Bill said the other day, somehow you were right on scripture and you were wrong on the gospel. And so I think when we think about John Lewis, who does see in Dr. King someone who speaks to the social gospel, but even Lewis as a young boy initially is like, where's the church? Where are my Black ministers? Where's my pastor talking about this? And so much of scripture is about liberation and freedom, and and kind of creating a new society, a new world. And yet how much of the church, how much the white church in the South was really invested in things should not change.
Right.
Again, is like so antithetical to scripture. Scripture is like things have to change.
Mm,
And they have to change for your betterment, for our betterment. It's not some zero sum game in scripture. And yeah, I think at some point the white church had decided, and white society, it was somehow a zero sum game. You know, if black folks can vote, if black folks have access, somehow I lose something, as opposed to we all gain something. We all gain something. Beverly continues to put good things. So the statement from the Alabama clergy that prompted the letter from the Birmingham jail. So you can, those of you, you can go back and read the document that started the conversation. And then at some point, and Beverly, I want you to not simply have to be our fact finder the whole time, but if you do find the book, again, a response of those 8 clergy, I think it was 8 clergy persons he was writing.
mm, mm. The other thing I would comment on, just because we started with all the violence and everything else, the training
Oh yeah.
that they did in walkthrough, accepted, and that's even talked about in the Birmingham letter, but education, discipline, preparation, even trying to keep it true, SNCC trying to keep it true when newer people were coming with different ideas, but just it was practical, but just the discipline it took, for them to do that training and then live into that training, as they demonstrated and marched, is just, I wonder if that could happen today, right? I honestly do.
Yeah.
Even the preparation of wills, right?
Well, I think also, I had an experience once to be in a room. I say in a room with like 3,000 people, and the Dalai Lama was being interviewed,
Mm,
and of course, someone always asked the question like, "How did you get to be the Dalai Lama?" Or if I wanted to be the Dalai Lama, like, what would I need to do? And inevitably people are kind of saying, like, just help me understand your life. And his response is obviously, how many hours upon hours upon hours upon hours have I sat in meditation? It's like I, it's all this stuff you can't see that then leads towards this life that you say you want. And I think the thing I've experienced, I know in Lexington there were some conversations, a thing called Unlearn Fear and Hate, where we were talking about Christian and Muslims and Jews doing some work together. And I mentioned to them, for me as a Christian clergy person, if we were going to be involved in that work, it would need to be nonviolent. And if it was going to be nonviolent, we'd have to spend some time, like, what does that really mean? And I think what happens is increasingly, especially in this day and age, we just want to jump to the action, right? And I think what's powerful, I guess it might have been the first book or maybe this book, where the one person is able to just admits, like, I realize I can't do this.
that was the first, yeah.
I'm gonna, I would pop somebody. And so in that regard, at least his willingness to be honest to say, I'm going to leave because I realize the commitment to nonviolence is at the core of what this is about. I can't do that, so I need to be honest about that. Yeah, I think, and
Contribute in a different way.
yeah, he'll do something else. But also, what's wild in this, Will Campbell is a name that comes up, and Will Campbell,
Yes.
ended up living in Tennessee and a remarkable character. What I love about what John Lewis does in this story is his willingness to tell the whole truth about even these moments of conflict, but he does it in a way that's not divisive.
Mhm.
He has disagreements with Stokely Carmichael. He has disagreements with Will Campbell. He has disagreements with Dr. King.
Philip Randolph, all of them.
And he can see, and I think again that's the call to nonviolence. He can still see the humanity in people that he disagrees with. And when he talks about Malcolm X,
Yep.
he says, I respected him in so many ways. We chose a different path, and I think a call to nonviolence I mean, it's in the Gospels when Jesus talks about praying for the enemy.
Mhm.
I think to pray for the enemy is not, I pray that a bag of rocks fall on their head. You pray for the enemy is like somehow I want to be reconciled to them. Somehow I want my life and their life to somehow there to be some kind of connection. And if even if it's just in the case of the movement, as it begins to splinter, as it begins to have different kind of pinch
Right.
points,
Mhm.
it loses his ability to still stay engaged with people. I don't know if people remember this last year at John Lewis's funeral
Mhm.
when Bill Clinton spoke. Bill Clinton took a pot shot at Stokely Carmichael in his talk. I don't know if people remember this. I'm sure, and he did it, I think, in a way of somehow praising John Lewis. But I'm sure John Lewis in that moment would have said, "That's not why we're not here to settle scores. We're not, don't praise me by putting someone else down." And I think to think about how many times Lewis was arrested, how many times he was beaten, how many times, and again, like with Dr. King, even at some point, he's in a room where at some point, John Lewis is in so many rooms where there's no one who could say I've done more for the movement than John Lewis, right? But John Lewis's willingness to be where he is and disagree with people, let them disagree with him without playing the I know better card. I mean, even when with Will Campbell, he just says, "Okay,
We're gonna march.
I'm going to march." Again, I'm at some point, you can have all this evidence, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot about also even how we keep doing this sort of work without just splintering into,
Yeah.
with each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean, part of those conversations when I was reading it, part of me was feeling he's having respect for his elders,
Yeah,
right? Because even when they were talking about changing his speech and all of that, he's like, okay, I can tweak it here and there, and the gist of it remains, right? I don't need to put down or push back too hard on these, elder statesmen,
yeah.
as far as he was concerned, given his age and all.
Also, you mentioned the violence in this. When I think of things that seem hard or that I can't imagine doing, um, the idea of the freedom rides, the idea of I'm going to get on a bus and I'm going to go to the middle of nowhere, or
Yeah.
actually the middle of somewhere. I know where I'm going.
Mhm.
To think about, because we use the word, we talk about being vulnerable now, emotionally vulnerable. I mean, in this case, I mean, the degree to which and I think this is where the fact that this book has these visual images is so powerful of the and you mentioned the little boy beating up the man and that image of the bus aflame in Anniston. Um, I mean, I mean, you're stranded. I mean, so just the degree to which, and for John Lewis, this sense of like, I'm called to do this.
Mm.
I want to do this.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Diane Nash saying, let us keep going. I just talk about a force of will.
And all the systems that are against you, how many times were they set up by the cops,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
right? I mean, led to a place just to be assaulted,
Yeah.
right, by others, or driven. Where Bull Connor drove him to the Tennessee line and let him out, right, in the middle of Klan country. I mean, that was all part of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, and I don't want to jump ahead, but I'll jump ahead. I'll give a preview. Um, in volume 3, when Lewis is getting ready to march at Selma, and
Mm.
he puts Thomas Merton's Seeds of Contemplation, he puts that book in his backpack. He says, I want to have this if I'm in prison, if I'm in the jail. Um, to me, as a person of faith and as a person of prayer, I mean, it does say something about, in the case of John Lewis being a person of prayer, there has to be some kind of resolve in you that would give you the courage to do this.
Yeah.
And we talk about the spiritual forces in the civil rights movement, or the nonviolent work. Or, I mean, there has to be a core philosophy that is going to keep you going.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you're bringing to mind one of my favorite verses that I speak to folks about that has guided me many times is walking on faith, right? It's not just believing, but acting as if it's true,
Yeah,
right? That you're doing the right thing and you're going to keep doing it because you believe in it so soundly. And I mean, and as we talked about in the first volume, I mean, he's got a Bible at 4 and he's been a preacher ever since, right? I mean, he truly believes in, God's will and God's love and God's protection, to wherever extent it needs to be until time is up. But even when you talk about how he holds himself and how he has this I thou relationship, even him in Congress, look at the conversations he had to deal with, in that body. But he always did it with grace and love, um, and as much understanding as he could muster, not backing up, but being willing to listen and being open to other people's viewpoints and ideas. Um, there was a word you used a little bit ago, order. And that was also in the letter from Birmingham jail, and it talked about moderate whites. And some of that has come up in the past year or so, right? So you guys say, it's almost like, why are you making all this noise? Why don't you just sit down and talk to people? And it's like, well, when we sit down and talk, they go, next week, next month, next year, just wait. It's not that time yet. And so there's this interest and attraction to order and peace and calm. And just like, with the Black Lives Matter movements or marches and things like that, people talk about, why are you destroying the stores? Why are you, doing all this stuff? And what is failed is for someone to turn their head and say, what precipitated this? Right? There's so much attention to what doesn't feel right and comfortable that they don't look at the trigger, the cause of that behavior. And that's painful, right? So you're gonna be more upset with us doing a nonviolent march than keeping us in the back of the bus, or keeping us uneducated, or keeping us hungry, or keeping us with low wages. So all of that is not worthy of attention and voice. But us marching down the street and maybe pissing someone off is worthy of much uproar.
Well, at the end of John Lewis's speech, at the section that's excerpted in the book, he basically says, "Wake up!" Right?
Exactly.
Up. And again, waking up is a New Testament idea. We're invited to wake up. Paul tells us to wake up. The psalmist tells us to wake up.
Yep.
And I think what is so often, because we always have the option to sleepwalk through our lives, right? Just to kind of zone out and just sort of just be in the zone. And I think, I remember as a kid, I guess I was 12 or 13 years old at the height of my Little League baseball career. I was first learning about the Holocaust, and it was only years later when I was in college that and again, obviously a 12-year-old cut up some slack, but I realized while I was learning about the Holocaust, Pol Pot and Cambodia is happening, so at any given moment, all the stuff, either global or locally, that we can just ignore, again, for the sake of order, right? Because again, I think if you like the way the world is, then order is awesome, right? Because it keeps it going.
Yep.
And when it works, it keeps it, then order, order is a way to say, we think this is fair. And I think, and so I think in this regard, the protest, the invitation to conversion is to say, you are asleep. And I think it also, we talk about spiritual gifts, but there's the spiritual practice that we're all called to pay attention. And I think when we start paying attention, and not just to me, I start paying attention to Denise, and you say, here's what it's like in my life. You know, I was a corporate exec, and still I was a Black woman in America, and this is what it was like for me. And to think about the ways in which our ability to listen to each other's story, and then to realize the story is not just connected to a personal moment; it's connected to a larger systemic moment. To say, so how do we, how do we um, create some disorder to then create what,
Mm,
what is the dream? What is that beloved community? Yeah.
right, right. I agree. And you mentioned his speech. I mean, I just noted some of the themes from his speech in March for Jobs and Freedom, March Against Starvation Wages, right? How much are we talking about? We need a living wage today, right? Living in constant fear of a police state. We've had that conversation. Voting, voting, right? And just we're tired. We're tired, I mean, it's like it's all like still so relevant, sadly,
Yeah. Yeah.
still quite relevant.
Well, and I think what's interesting, you know, on page 95, when Dr. King is talking to Senator, at that time, Attorney General Kennedy, um, he's talking about the movement as a potential to save the soul of America. And again, I think that's when you realize, um, oh, I love this. Just a second. Terry Wirtz, was it Martin
Yeah,
Luther King that said the church should be the thermometer? Should not be
yes,
the thermometer, should be the thermostat.
that's
Yes.
a letter.
Yes.
Yep.
Um, and I think I think, Terry, that's the invitation of the church. When I think about liturgy and think about worship,
Mhm.
when we gather and we're sent out. To me, it's like we go into liturgy and say, here's the way the world should be.
Yeah.
The world should be, there's a table, it's God's table. We're all invited to eat from that table. Now, go out and bring more people to this table, not to balance the budget or to make more Episcopalians, but bring more people to this table, and then go in the world and live like that's the way it should be. That I've heard it said that there is another world and it's here, right? That we can choose to make another world that is here. So yeah, the idea that the church will be the thermostat, not the thermometer, is a great image of the voice and the movement, as opposed to we have to reflect the way the world is, right? We have to say, well, that's just how the world is, as opposed to the call for what could be possible. So to me, when I think that's when Dr. King talks about the movement could save the soul of America. So I guess what's remarkable for all the hatred, for all the violence, for all that was reflected back and poured upon the movement, at some point, a Lewis, a Diane Nash, a King, a Farmer, a Foreman, what they're asking for is, again, for America. Was it Langston Hughes, for America to be America, right? It's like, be this thing that you say you are.
Keep your promises.
Keep your promises. Yeah.
Keep your
Yeah.
promises.
Be this different. Yeah. And I think, it's, if you've read much around the Cold War, the Soviet Union had a field day at this time to say, you all say you're this free country and this is how you treat, Black people and brown people and
They have
Native.
a field day today
Yeah.
in terms of what we're doing in terms of voting, how we're treating protesters in the streets, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, all of that is still available to them today. Still available to them today. What would I say?
So, um, yeah, if you like, so, and I love the images again, how, like, if you start like at 101, 107, 108, when they're in prison, again, I love how, they're in the jail, and to me, almost the way that those are drawn, as I'm reading it, I sort of feel in a prison, right? I mean, the images are tighter, the language, that the sort of being imprisoned feels real there. but again, they stay free in that. They stay free in the singing, and they ultimately. And I think what I love on page 109, I love the contrast of the prison cell and the walking, and a walking in sort of ascension. There's this movement up.
Yeah,
People are joining the movement. People
right,
are willing to put their lives at risk.
right.
Um, Powerful, powerful stuff.
Mm. The other the other thing that was noteworthy for me, and it's been discussed clearly before, was just the power of the media,
Mhm.
right? So one, when they were first doing some of their marches, where were they? It's on 132, and how they used the radio to let people know what was going on, and how they had code words, right? Party at the park, bring your toothbrushes, right? And that was for the young kids,
Mhm.
right, to march. And then that led to the scenes that most of us probably recall from newsreels or what have you, the hoses and the dogs, and the impact that that had on the nation was just what was needed, right? And it's similar today when we talk about, the phones and videotaping things, right? It's almost like you can't believe it until you see it, sadly, right? And this, I mean, that was just enough to get some folks to, it shook up some people for
Yep.
sure. When you saw that against children, especially.
Well, and it goes back to even, there's on page on page 136, you talk about um
Mm,
when Connor says, turn on the hoses, and you realize there are people with him who are thinking, okay, you don't want to do that. So even the awareness of like what you're about to do,
yeah,
first of all, it's wrong.
yeah.
And the reaction is going to, yeah, you think you're going to win the day and you're not going to win the day. um
But it also underscores bystanders, right?
yeah.
People watched, saw it, and was like, they acted powerless.
Mhm.
Mayor acted powerless versus the police chief.
Emma Gandy, do you think those people who use the fire hoses and unleash the dogs against children ever regretted their actions? Maybe some. You know, I think what's interesting, Emma, you know, I know the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the work in South Africa that Archbishop Tutu convened. I mean, you definitely have experiences there of people speaking of their complicity in evil and their
Mhm.
complicity in violence. Um, I, you know, I mean, I've definitely had conversations with older folk, both in my family and that I've known, who've talked about the ways in which, and I've never met someone who had was running a fire hose, but talked about moments of conversion, of realizing what they had represented, what they had stood for, and had places of conversion in their life. So I think, as I would say, as for me, as a Christian who believes in conversion and believes in change of heart, um, and that change of heart then comes with amendment of life, right? Of, okay, so that was wrong, and what will I do about it to rectify that? So at one point, Will Campbell, the white Mississippi clergy person who is working on civil rights, at some point begins to work with the KKK. In that, he realizes, I've got to change these guys' hearts. So I mean, in that regard, I think Will Campbell was not willing to give up on people,
Yeah.
and realized, as a white Mississippian who came from, I think probably would have said, I'm he's probably kin to the Klan in some way.
Yeah.
His mission was to go and to listen and to change hearts, and I know there are stories of that happening in his life, and so
And
I'd
I,
like.
I would applaud that, right? I mean, because oftentimes I would say white folks who want to help think about, oh, how can I help the Black people or the brown people over there?
Yeah.
And I would offer to you, look to your left, look to your right, look across the table at the other white folks you're around and see what benefit you can make with them.
Yeah.
The killer of Medgar Evers.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah. Emma, I do think who was that? Beckwith? Beckwith was the name? Yeah, I mean, obviously we also have too many examples of people that just
Right.
keep doubling down on hate, right? Keep doubling down on because again, I think once you begin, once you open the door to I can see the other as not being human, then what I'm willing to do to them and to what degree doesn't matter because they're not human, then I don't have to give it much thought because they're not human.
Let me test this with you, Brian.
Yeah.
One of the things I talk about with folks all the time is it takes a lot of work to hate. It takes so much energy to hate and to keep it going and to be mad. It takes more muscles in your face to frown than to smile,
Mhm.
right? As an example, why is that kind of work so interesting, right? To keep in that space. Why do people work so hard to stay there? It boggles my mind because it takes a lot of work to keep this up.
Yeah. Yes. I think of people I've known in my life who and I mean, what I often think is, somebody did something really bad to them at some point. I think I often want to be sympathetic and think somebody did something to them at some point
Yeah.
that is either so twisted or so demonic or so consistently hurtful that again they're imprisoned in something they can't get out of.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I think it is that you know I mean, and again, the New Testament, you know, as much as possible, live at peace with other people, and the living at peace, you know, and for that to be a deep kind of peace. It's not just, I'm civil at Denise, I see her at the post office, but live at peace with other, so the invitation is this abundant, robust, open life that is generative, right? And yet somehow we as and again, I think it's somewhere we get in this zero sum game, right? Of if we all win, then it doesn't matter. It only matters if somebody loses. Um, and if it in the color of the skin or a different religion or a different gender, you know, we find ways to find division, it seems. And where at some point at some point I think what is hopeful is I think a broken, converted, reconciled life, I believe, is a joyful life,
Yeah.
right? And so even for a John Lewis, so I think again, this is an example of John Lewis. He's going to get beat up. He's going to get arrested.
Mhm.
It's going to be hard, but he has that great language after his first arrest. It felt like I crossed over.
Yeah.
It's that he had that conversion moment of like, this is how I'm going to live my life. Even to the point of, and at the beginning of book 2, he realizes he's disappointed and embarrassed his family. And this is a man who loves his family, but you also know, and this is, I'm going to keep pushing the New Testament here, folks. When Jesus says, if you follow the gospel, you might end up hating your mother and your father. You might leave that family because the deeper call is to the conversion. So the case of John Lewis, I don't go home as much
Right.
because home became the movement because these people understand what's captivated me. So a Diane Nash can understand why a John Lewis says, I want to get back on a bus and go to Montgomery, which doesn't seem like a really smart idea. But for her, it makes total sense, right?
So Brian, you've mentioned the New Testament a number of times, given your role. I think the church can do a lot of good. And I also think there aren't as many young folks or folks going to church as there used to be.
Yep.
So where else do we kind of share this message or talk about this, or how do we propagate this that doesn't require, an 11 a.m. service or something like that?
So I'm still supportive of the 11 a.m. service too. I mean, but well, I think that's one of the for me one of the puzzlements right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, in some ways, COVID has impacted. COVID has kept us apart physically, but even before COVID, I mean, I think for me, and this is where I start to feel like an old man. It's like, what is that gathering narrative for us right now, right? I mean, so John Lewis as a 5-year-old is reading scripture, and
Right.
so he's getting this total biblical world that then is going to guide his life. So the church, even though he doesn't ultimately become a clergy person, the church guides his life and it's this story. And I think I th- you know and I think what's frightening right now with voter suppression laws is, even if we somehow thought, well, somehow the moral story is going to be the Constitution, or it's going to be this sort of common civic story. Yeah, I think I worry that we don't have that sort of gathering place, and that's a crisis for us right now.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
We have a lot of teachers in our church that we can give strength to. We need to thank everybody who teaches all the time. And my father taught a public school for 37 years, and um, he worked much harder than I mean, um,
Big job.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Terry Wirtz, local connection. On page 120, a young white SNCC photographer, Danny Line, is mentioned. He visited Knoxville in the late 60s and shot rolls of film. Some of these pictures featuring Knoxville are on display in the Knoxville Museum of Art Higher Ground Gallery. So Terry, is that a part of the permanent, like it's always there? Would that be the case? I'm assuming that is the case. So yeah, that's the guy they call Dandelion. So
Yeah. You got beat up.
Yes, it is always there. They will have one or two Danny Lyon
okay.
pictures.
Thank you for making us aware of that. Um, we're getting close to the end.
What an end.
Also, what's remarkable about John Lewis is he's everywhere. Freedom Rides, March on Washington. We haven't even got to the Selma March yet.
Right.
So this very young man is in these really important places, and I'm grateful for how much of his speech we are given in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And to think about, he's this young man in the White House. He's this young man with these older Black mentors, and he recognizes. I think he also, as you said earlier, he honors his elders. He recognizes the moment he's in, right? So and I think he recognizes what the long-term game is. So he changes the speech so the elders can live with it, and he realizes he keeps but he keeps his own integrity.
Yeah.
So he gives a speech he can give, not the speech he wrote. He can give a speech he can give, and that speech, moved people. And yeah.
I did have to chuckle when they were like, wait, we're your leaders.
Oh, I love that.
Because the march was going on without them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very good. Very, very good.
Keep asking. So Beverly,
Mm.
while Beverly's also supportive of the 11 a.m. service, let me just be clear, St. the Signal Mountain every Sunday morning. And I think also too, what I would say to folks on this call, because it comes back to at some point. So we read this book. If you haven't noticed, y'all, we have dropped now the information on the October 12th through 15th pilgrimage to Selma. So if you have a chance to sign up for that, please do. We plan to take a bus. We can take up to 50 people, so consider going on that. I think for me, the question will be, so now what, right? So now what, once we keep doing this work? And, I think what I would say is, Denise's question is the right question for all of us, if the New Testament, if the letter from Birmingham jail, if there is this narrative that we believe is a hopeful narrative, how do we find a way to share that narrative and live that narrative and not be anxious about it, right? I mean, because I can get really anxious and I just wish more people came to church, sort of thing. I can sit there and beat that drum all day long, but the larger goal is how do we set people free, right? It's not a matter who gets credit for it, and I think that's where also just to kind of keep cultivating a heart and a mind that's curious, and find out where people are, and not with I want to find out where you are so I can woo you to my side, as much as to find out where people are. Eric Harrelson feel the ghost as he walked across the Pettus Bridge. 8 o'clock at my house gets crazy late. So Denise, last word for you tonight. What are your thoughts tonight?
I'm enjoying the conversations, and I just hope, as you just said, I hope it moves people to have conversations about this stuff with people that look like them. Right. I just hope we just keep the conversations going, because I think as I mentioned in the first session, that's what helps me. Right. It's really making connections. It's being seen and seeing other people that are different from me, with love. That's what I need.
Okay. Danny Line has a webpage that is a blog. Also, just know Brother Andrew, I think, is on his way to Wisconsin for his orders retreat time, so he'll be away for a few days. Beverly, thank you for hosting the chat. I bet folks will find some more. Thank you to the Works with your great clapping there. That we'll find some more of these links on that page. So again, if you haven't read A Letter from a Birmingham Jail, amazing document.
Long. It's long. It was way longer than I expected. It's like 9 pages. And I'm envisioning, I'm like, he didn't have a typewriter. He didn't have any books. He wrote this off the top of his head. Yeah. It was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, again, the Apostle Paul, he New Testament, he had a lot. And I think in Philippi, they gave you 1 piece of parchment a day, right? Finally, he knocked that thing out. Yeah, it's worth reading. Definitely worth reading. Thank you all for joining. Let's do jazz hands for everybody for giving an hour to each other.
Thank you so much.
Okay, blessings on y'all. Keep your hearts open. We'll see you. Oh, so I believe we will see each other the 3rd Monday in August 16th. Is that correct? At 7 o'clock? Yeah. And I'm aware that other groups are reading this, and other sort of small groups. So think about how you might keep working with folks in your community, or folks you want to, or again, is there somebody you want to have, like Denise was saying, there's somebody you want to read this book with. So after you've read it, share it with someone that you might also want to take a look at it. Okay. Blessings on you all. Get some good rest.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Denise.